All right, folks. I come from an interesting area of the country. It's definitely not an easy farming part of the country. We'll get to exactly where it is now. I think already in primary school, I was lucky to be close to a couple of good farmers. And then I saw that what we're doing isn't working. What we're doing isn't going to get us to where we need to be if we still want to be on the farm in 20, 30 years, let alone if we want to be on the farm without financing it somehow from outside. So this regenerative path, we really started off in 2019. I'm very fortunate. My dad's very open-minded, very common sense approached individual. So he's always given me sort of enough ropes. I can't stuff it up. And if I do stuff it up, we can always fall back on what we know and then figure out as we go. So I think you've heard a couple of things already, but one important thing is make mistakes early on. Start small, make mistakes fast, and learn quickly. I think that's very important. I like these statements. These are just basic things that I've learned that I think a lot of people don't always want to say. But one important thing is humans beings, we are fundamentally bad at managing complexity. Nature is a complex being, it's a complex creation, and it's chaotic at best. And we as humans, we don't like that. Our instinct is to simplify things, to say, let's plant one crop at a time, let's keep one animal at a time. And once there's too many weeds or too many things, we panic and we reduce it down to simplicity. And that's got very, very negative long-term unintended consequences. So we are bad at managing complexity. Another thing is once you start going down this path, you just have questions the whole time. I thought we knew a lot of things last year. We've learned, I think, 5 times as much from then. And it just goes on like that. So what's important, don't get overwhelmed with trying to understand how everything works, how to get it right the whole time, every time. Don't be scared because we'll never get it right. What's important, don't figure out how it works as much. Focus on how to know how not to break it. Because if we're not breaking nature actively, it can fix itself and it'll show us as humans who are not good at managing complexity how it wants to be fixed. And it'll just fix itself. That's the nice thing. Then we often hear of ecosystems being in equilibrium. So like the free market economy, equilibrium doesn't exist. So an ecosystem is always heading towards equilibrium. It overshoots, then there's abundance, then it self-corrects. So it's a self-correcting ecosystem. So don't think your farm has to be this perfect Garden of Eden scenario. Because again, I don't think we'll achieve it. And if there's abundance, you'll have too much of one thing, you'll have shortage again. It's just the way nature works. I think it's important that we recognize that. And then we all say to each other, we want to farm naturally, but the act of farming is actually unnatural. Irrespective of how you see it, if we wanted to be 100% natural, we needed to be living off the veldt, eating berries and red meat, etc. But I don't think that's going to work for us anymore today. And then we would also be exposed to nature doing this. So farming is inherently unnatural. Why I'm saying this is as you go along this path, occasionally you are going to have to grab the herbicide, maybe give a fertilizer here or there, or buy in some compost, or maybe you're going to need to use some antibiotics or medicines in the animals. We want to farm as naturally as possible, but to go cold turkey all the way, as they say, it's going to cost you a lot of money. Good. So exactly where are we geographically speaking? We are in Rustenburg, between Rustenburg and Magaliesburg, roughly in the middle. And we are between those two dotted lines. And that's where you get the Highveld Plateau, the high ground, 1,500 meters above sea level and higher. And that sort of falls down into the bushveld. And that dotted line there is against the Magaliesberg mountain. We farm in an area called the Moertveld in Afrikaans. It's about a 30-kilometer wide strip. And it makes for very interesting farming because you've got the worst of the Highveld and the worst of the bushveld sort of thrown in together. So an interesting area. We work on a family farm. How we sort of ended up thinking in this way also is we actually 4 families living on the same farm. It's a family farm, so that's the parents and 3 sons, all with their families. So we initially thought, hang on, it's not even going to be possible for one of us to farm full-time on the farm. Let's just all sort of farm it part-time. Maybe let's divide the farm again into smaller parts and go back in time. And we just sort of made a mindset and said, no, let's invest in the farm. Intensification is not an option for us because we don't have strong bores, we don't have underground water. So we've got to make do. And we said, let's try, instead of carving up the farm into small pieces, let's farm the whole farm, cattle. And on top of that, a layer, the whole farm game. So that's sort of where we're at. So there's enough space on the whole farm for all of us. We realized maybe we are not as helpless as we think we are sometimes. We can actually restore the farm. We can get more productivity back onto the farm. Just on conditions quickly, I always say we are tick head office. So when the Bondpoort bosluis, the tick that gives us hard water in other parts of the country, when they are not up to standard, I always say they get sent back to us because that's where they learn from the ticks how to really kill cattle. So we get basically all the ticks you get in South Africa, we get with the associated diseases from gal sickness, heart water, red water, everything. Especially summer high temperatures, some humidity, if we get rain, we really struggle with external parasites, flies, larvae laying eggs. You'll see maybe in some of the pictures, we've got lots of cows who don't have ears. That all goes together with just parasite pressure is really, really high. If you don't look after your cattle, and we were very dependent on chemicals, on pharmaceuticals to do that, but if you don't look after your cattle, you're going to be out of business very soon. As I said, warm summers, cold winters. So we've got these extremes. We can't just go all indigenous cattle breeds and for the heat tolerance, because then we get the cold winters where they struggle. And then, yeah, our veld condition, we're sort of on that line where we get a mix of sweet veld and sour veld. So we're not the Kalahari where you get the sweet veld that you can graze any time of the year. We also do struggle in winter with low quality forage as well. So that's what it looks like when we don't get it right. That's an animal that's just, that's a heifer that should go into calf. She, complete tick infestation, nutritional stress. That's what it looks like really when we get it wrong. And she's at the point of no return. There's nothing you can do for her. So that's why that picture I took there once sent to a friend. And I said, you got to choose medicines or just shoot the animal, get it over with. So when we get it wrong, that's what happens. But fortunately, we've learned a lot of things, and it doesn't look like that always. That's a bit an impression of what the farm looks like. That's the end result of a medium density or high density grazing. You can see most of all the old stuff is gone, and we got some nice fresh regrowth coming out there. Just a little bit on the size of the farm. We talked a lot about small farms, super intensive, and I think there's really exciting opportunities there. So size is definitely not a barrier or a burden. We, on the other hand, we're on 1,000 hectares, but super extensive. So we've got to figure out how do we farm profitably on this with all the associated costs and high maintenance costs of running land that size without having our input costs run away. And how do we do this while still regenerating the farm? So I think a couple of reasons why our story might be interesting is the fact that we are still on a super, super low cost model. So it's all about what does it cost us to produce a kilogram of meat? How many rands would it cost us to produce a kilogram of meat? And that argument would be the same on this farm, on our farm, or on a 20,000 hectare farm in the Kalahari. I think another reason why our story might be quite interesting is a lot of South Africa is communal land. It's land that's not owned by an individual farmer. It's often close to game reserves, next to game reserves, buffer areas. So I think our story might be interesting for people who are in that kind of a scenario. I'd be very interested to see how exactly structures work in communal farming areas, because I think that in here there might be a model that can work for those areas also, where cattle are part of your retirement, part of your savings account, part of people who live in the cities, but the cattle are in the countryside, etc. How can we get young people into farming? So maybe you'll spot the same opportunities there that we've also seen. That's the Magaliesberg mountain behind us. So you can see the high mountain, and we're in the foot of the valley. Behind us is the high veld. That's what it looks like in winter. So like I said, not this beautiful lush green grass. We got to figure out how we can get this veld more productive. But in summers, it can be nice and green. On the right-hand side there, you can see that's roughly speaking how we graze off in the veld. As the veld quality improves, it's a lot easier to graze the veld clean, utilize more of the grass, return more nutrients to the soil. On the left-hand side, you'll see we do have a small part of the farm which is into fields. We used to try with a low budget, fertilize them, cut hay, etc., but costs a lot of money and you don't really get it back. Just to keep one baler running to try and make money out of that, and with fertilizer costs being, what's it now, 11, 12, 13,000 rands a ton sometimes. If you fertilize, you got to do it properly or not at all. And that's just led us down this path of non-selective grazing also. But those are some results that we've seen on Olandsgras, Reproductive curvula. Good. So we talked about where we are and what it looks like. Where are we on our regenerative path, if you like? We're going from A, we're moving to B. And I got to warn you, if you're currently a conventional farmer, you're in a model that sort of halfway works for you, but you're scared that it's not going to last forever. You want to change. There's a valley. There's definitely a valley. Remember that graph that Andrew showed just now about the conventional farmers' long-term income, going down that way. The opposite, I've got that curve over here. It's what we call the J curve. We went through a bit of a dip switching over. We went from a weaner production model where we keep cattle we wean the calves at around 6 months and then try and sell them into the feedlot market. Prices go up and down. We're trying to compete with farmers who produce in much more profitable areas or more productive areas than ours. So we actually didn't stand a chance. And we're switching over to marketing 2-year-old, 2.5-year-old, market-ready grown animals that we can just slaughter off the felt and hopefully get a good price for them. So that's where we're moving to. I think I dare say we sort of halfway already down the path. As Andrew said, we started 2019, but I think as we go and we learn, I think B will always move just a little bit further. So I don't think we'll ever get there, but it's the journey which is so much fun, isn't it? Good. So just in summary, again, we've sort of talked a little bit about what we do, but to try and fit it into one sentence, as Andrew said, we get so many farms where we don't really have a plan yet. I think it's important to have a plan and to know what you do, even if that changes continuously. But essentially, we try to farm beef cattle and game on the same land whilst restoring the natural habitat that we do this on, with the goal of producing food in as natural a way as possible. And of course, the most important part, the bottom line, to minimize inputs. We want to really keep inputs as low as we can and keep as many rands on the farm. Every time I buy a bottle of ivermectin or I buy a bag of fertilizer, that's money leaving the farm. So we want to try and keep as many rands on the farm as we can. Good. So we'll talk quickly about the beef cattle side, then the game side, and then we'll get into some other specifics. We are on Bonsmara cattle. We'll talk about the cattle themselves a little bit. Let's talk first how we keep them in. How do we manage them? So in your head, see a 1,000 hectare farm. It's game fenced on the outside so that the game can't get out. Traditionally, we had about 30 camps with steel wire inside subdivisions, and we're systematically starting to take out these fences. We're going to roughly leave the 1,000 hectares in about 4 250 hectare camps where the game can pass through, but the cattle stay behind, just so that if they do get out, they don't mix too quickly. But essentially, we use steel droppers. These are all the steel droppers we're taking out from the fence, and we use just polywire, cheap polywire, what you saw here today, and we use this type of a screw-on insulator, which really works very, very nice for us. It means we can just undo the screw, adjust the height, and retighten it. So it's really nice. It clips onto a dropper. There's no wire, nothing. They're cheap and cheerful, and we're adaptable. So any regenerative methodology, any plan has to be highly adaptable because it's a chaotic environment where you need to observe and adapt really quickly. So this works really, really nice for us. These soft European style pegs that you push in with your foot, they just don't work with our rocks. So you push them in once and they just go. Sorry for the noises. Then water, we've seen, is extremely important. So fortunately, the farm did have some water infrastructure. There's boreholes, there's dams already, because we were watering these 30 camps already. And we started off with the low-hanging fruit, the most fertile part of the farm, where the most infrastructure is, where it was the easiest. Don't start on the toughest part. Start on the easiest part of your farm. And we would dig up the old existing pipes, put in quick couple of water fittings so that we can access without a tap or without fittings and wire. We just plug in the water trough you can see there on the right, and we can move that trough with the animals. I cannot stress how important it is. If you want to do non-selective grazing, we're forcing the animals to eat non-selectively, and especially we're going to start off with poor quality grazing and hopefully improve the quality. And in that transition time, that dip in the J curve, it's extremely important the cattle have good quality water in enough volumes and consistently there, because we're asking their rumen to really work hard for us. So we've got to give them all the water so that those microbes can work and do their thing. We use a single tine ripper that works really nice. You rip the line up and down until you can pass through. We like to plant quite deep because water is scarce and we've got warthogs and porcupines. And then, yeah, so you rip it up and down, and then we've just got a steel pipe that we welded onto the back of that ripper. And basically you can plant 2 or 3 kilometers of piping a day if you did your preparation work properly. And then we'll just make it easy. You join your pipe every 100 meters because that's the length you buy them in. We just put in a T-piece with our quick coupler on there. Works like a charm. So you know every 100 meters you've got a water point, and then you work according to that. You can see the water trough over there. That's a 500-liter trough. If it's empty, one person can carry it. So before we move the cattle, we'll just unplug it. They finish it off, and otherwise it's got a prop. You can just pull it out, empty it, and then one person can easily move it. So it's really nice. 40 mil pipe coming in, and a big high flow ball valve. You don't always want pressure. Pressure is often your enemy because pipes that are under pressure burst easily. They don't like cold or temperature changes. You know, once the pipe moves a little bit, they come out. But a 40 mil pipe, low pressure, works really nice. We need flow. We want flow to move through. In the background, you can see the little energizer we use. I think that's a 1 joule. It's the biggest fully portable unit you can get. We run about 5 or 6 of those by now. They really work. It's a Schlotfeldt product. It's got its little solar panel on the back. You just pop it onto a dropper, and it's where the cattle are. That's really nice. Once you have fence lines we don't use, we'll disconnect them and then just have the line where the animals are with the maximum amount of energy. Good. So as I mentioned, we're using Bonsmara cattle. I think by and large, there might be 1 or 2 exceptions, but I think any breed can work. We've got people with Simmental cattle, Nguni cattle, Bonsmara. Essentially, it's important figure out what you want to achieve with these animals, and within every breed, that's important. There are type of animals that'll fit in within every breed and animals that won't. So even if you take an Nguni, which is a highly adapted hardy felt animal, they're most likely you'll have some animals that do great, some that don't. If you do a Simmental, which is a heavier, bigger framed animal, later maturing carcass, you'll have some that do well and some that don't do well. We use Bonsmaras because it's what we've got on the farm. My parents started breeding them already in 1980. So they're highly adapted. They were bred on the farm out of Pinskauer, Simbra, some commercial animals, and they started using bulls and registered a stud and bred animals for our conditions. So that's very nice. That's a luxury we've got. If you're buying in animals, if you can, if your farmer, your neighbor's not too bad, buy his animals. As close as you can to home gives you a bit of a head start. Animals don't like to adapt that much to new felt types. Good. So yeah, we thought we had animals that were well adapted, as I mentioned, bred from 1980 on the farm, out of animals that were even there before that. But once we started doing non-selective grazing, we even had to readapt and fine-tune it. So what we know now that works in this system, typically an animal with a frame size plus minus 450 to 500 kilograms. It's a lighter animal. It needs to eat less to sustain, have enough energy to produce. So we talk about the relative intake. If we say an animal eats 3% of its body mass, 3% of 600 kilograms versus 450 kilograms, there's a small difference there, right? We want them to be grass converters. We're not interested in selling off to the feedlot market anymore, so we're not impressed when we have a light calf that can go into feedlot and grow fast there. We want to grow them on the farm. So animals, efficient grass converters inherently come from cows that do well on the system. So if you breed your own animals from what you have on the farm, start small and breed there, you should grow an efficient grass converter. As I mentioned, high heat, stress, parasites is a big problem. So we're looking for thicker skin, looser skin, clean ears, not too many hairs in the ears. That's a big feature for us because it keeps the ticks out of the ears, it keeps the bleeding away, the flies away. And obviously an animal that's in heat stress, typically it's in summer when it's our breeding season, they're not going to reproduce. And as Andrew said, we're not running, what did you call it? A cow hotel. We're running a business, or we try. Very important for us, I think now we're realizing, is the post-weaning gain on grass. That's important. We used to produce weaner calves. So if we got 180 kilograms, that's great. On a trailer, money's in the bank the next day, which is fantastic. Now, all of a sudden, we need to wean and still get that animal growing. So we've sort of added another dimension. And if you're in a low cost system like we are, And if you commit to doing it low cost, once you start feeding your animals, if you do chicken manure feeding, feeding hay, etc., in winter to help them, you're on the wrong route. You're just buying back your own animals with money that you should have been making elsewhere. We're just on a very, very simple maintenance lick, no production lick, no winter feed. So there's just some examples. We'll just look at some pictures. This is a cow born in 2017. She weighs around 508 kilograms. She's given us 4 calves. In that picture, she's actually 8 months pregnant. She should be calving this week now. That picture was taken a little while ago, a month ago. But what I like on this animal, I know from working with a nice thick skin, clean ears, we don't see too much leg. We see a nice big rumen capacity so they can harvest grass, store it in the rumen and get the energy from there to grow. She's also got a beautiful long bushy tail to keep away flies. Really important for us. This cow I just put in here to show that it's not always the pretty ones that are productive. This cow was born in 2014. She's already given us 7 calves. She only weighs 455 kilograms. One reason is because she's just weaned a calf at 240 kilograms. So it's not all about the weaning weight. That's what farmers like to talk about at the braai. But essentially, it's a kilograms over the scale from the farm that makes you pay your bills at the end. So if we want to get it to a 400 kilogram slaughtering weight, that's what I like, 400, 420, then we can really, really have a good product that we can sell out into the market for a slaughtering calf. There's another example, another 2017 animal, slightly heavier, 544 kilograms. He's given us 4 calves. Why I like her here in this picture, you can see she's just weaned a calf at 250 kilograms. She's 6 months pregnant in that picture. So that's what we need. We just want them there. We want them reproducing and in a happy shape. Slightly smaller animal, also again, a larger animal again, just a nice productive animal with the calf behind her. I just wanted to show a calf also. I think the best way, people often say, what do you look for in an animal? You look at the calf. If you want to judge a cow, judge her by calves, by offspring. Here's another animal. A lot of people, and especially if you're on indigenous breeds, Nguni, Tuli, Mashona, these kind of breeds, a lot of people will say you have to calve at 2 years. They go to the bull at 1 year, you calve at 2 years, otherwise they're horrible animals. Here's an example, this is an animal, she's born in 2020, very late. She calved only now recently, so she wouldn't have passed that test, but she's given us a nice calf, and she's pregnant 2 months again. So don't penalize them just for when they conceive the first time. Look at how she reacts a little bit after that. Because if you just start culling from one end, you're going to have no cattle to pay the bills in the end. So don't just penalize on weight or only just on calves. So what's nice with us is we can put heifers to the bull. If they do conceive and they do take, great. If they don't, we want to slaughter at 2 years, about 400, 350, 400 kilograms in any case. So if she's not a dead waste, we're selling meat. So that's the important part. So don't just listen to what stud farmers or breeding societies will tell you. Look at what the calculator says and the pencil says on the bottom line. Temperament is very important for us. We don't get the animals into the kraal a lot anymore. We used to, especially in summer dip, almost weekly. We would have the animals in the kraal at least 50 times a year, every day. So basically for 1 month in the year, our animals were not grazing. And you've got to collect them, get them to the kraal and back. It's a lot of work. It's bush, it's hills, it's wasted labor. So where are we getting to now? We carving in the veld. So the animals carve in the veld, they don't carve at home. We need to tag, dehorn, weigh that calf in the veld. So we need a cow that will allow us to do that. So temperament's very important. We now dip individual animals. So if there's an outbreak or something happened, which we haven't had yet, I'll get the animals into the kraal and dip them as quick as I can. But what we do now, we are between our animals because they bunch together in a grazing herd. We can see every individual animal every day. We're close to them, they're used to us, and I can just, if I see an animal's got a lot of ticks I'm not comfortable with, I just dip that individual animal. Same goes for something like an ivermectin. If we have an infection, we use ivermectin because we need to save the animal. But we only inject that animal. We only treat that animal. And what that's done is the whole downstream, the reduction in use of chemicals has meant the whole downstream ecosystem, the whole biome, the big stuff and the small stuff that we don't see, the dung beetles, all those insects that do very important work for us, have come back. We used to have basically 0 dung beetles. Growing up, I didn't see any dung beetles on the farm. we would go to the Kruger Park and see them there and get excited. Now we have dung beetles on the farm galore. If you think about it, we'll move animals from patch to patch. We'll have about 1 cow pat per square meter. So that's 10,000 cow pats per hectare. And you can easily count up to 15 or 20 dung beetles in 1 cow pat. So just imagine how many kilograms of dung beetles we have on the farm working for us for free. I don't know how it works, but I realized if we stop breaking it, it comes back by itself. We are also busy with a bit of an experiment on our heifers. So the lighter animals, the cows that are going to the bull the first time, we've put on 2 Boran bulls. So the Boran is a grass-fed breed, if you like, essentially an early maturing carcass from East Africa originally. So it's a high felt animal, lives off grass. It's the cattle that the Maasai typically farm with in East Africa. Thick skin, very good parasite resistance. They typically put on more fat on grass because they're early maturing. If we feed them grain, they just explode with fat. So we hope that we'll see if we get these hybrid calves, we're going to run them side by side and see what we get. Maybe we switch over completely to Boran. Maybe we switch to another breed. We'll see when we get there. But I think it's important we're running them on the farm. We're not basing a decision just on a brochure or a prospectus. Good. So as I mentioned, we're trying to integrate game with the cattle as well. We'll talk a little bit about why we do it, but essentially we've got, I think, close to about 20 species already of game plus giraffe plus the cattle, which makes managing interesting. Remember that we can manage cattle, we can't manage the game. The game is free roaming. So keep that in the back of the mind. But why do we do that? One thing is, our ecosystem, we now know, should have been a grass savanna with big trees. That's what it was 500-600 years ago. The change came in around the same time out of interest that maize was introduced into our area. These beautiful crops we saw earlier on is what the indigenous people at that point were eating. They were eating millet, sorghums, legumes that were very tough to store. You couldn't produce a lot and just easily store it like you can maize. And also birds caused huge damage. And also game ate sorghum and millet. It's very tasty. So people could only, the area could only sustain a certain amount of people because they were dependent on millet and their livestock and their milk and their honey, etc. When we got maize in, we got this huge population explosion throughout all of Africa. It's not just South Africa. We got a huge population explosion and an economy that works on cattle as the money that we used to trade. And as a show of wealth, and an economy that runs on firewood, for example, also to melt iron to make high-value export products. Very quickly, the ecosystem started to go backwards. So when we started farming the area in a similar way like we do now, about 100 years ago, we were actually already farming on a slightly degraded ecosystem, which I think is quite interesting. We can't just beat up the grandfathers. This goes back a lot further. And I think it was Namasipiwe who said, we don't have a long history. We don't go back in history when we look for solutions. So that's one interesting factor. I think we must not just think 50 years ago. We can sometimes even think 500-600 years ago. Things happened then, had an influence. So how did this manifest itself in our area? We had a lot of bush encroachment, sickle bush, wild olive coming in, all manner of thorny and non-thorny broadleaves coming in. It's a byproduct also of overgrazing that got even worse when we introduced Western farming styles, fixed cattle fences. You didn't have enough money to make small camps, so you had big camps. The money, the fence was not as available. And then we started systematically really overgrazing the veld, ironically with too few animals. So what are we doing? We are trying to turn back the clock a bit. We're trying to farm more in a way which is more in tune with nature. And the cattle are grazing these shrubs for us. Aside from grazing the grass non-selectively, we try to graze the shrub non-selectively. Cattle are very effective browsers. You can see over there, those trees, some of those trees, the lower side is completely grazed out. As the cattle move away, the kudu, the other antelope, will come in and they'll graze all the regrowth, and that tree just says, I had enough, I got to grow up. Then as we get trees to grow up, now we've got to do something with them again, because we don't just want tall Christmas trees, we want big, I call them First National Bank trees, that like the emblem. That's where the giraffe come in. So the giraffe help us where the cattle maybe graze up to 2.2 meters. with their long tongues. Giraffe can come in and graze a tree maybe up to 4 meters tall, and they then force the tree to self-defend itself and grow out sideways. So that's sort of our model that starts to really work well for us. You can see those trees, how high they've been grazed off. And on the right-hand side, you can see how they're starting to branch out. So why do we want that particular shape of tree? When we have bush, sunlight doesn't get in, we can't grow grass, right? When we grow trees, what happens is for the first couple of hours in the day, we got sunlight coming in the morning. In the last couple of hours of day, we get sunlight coming in the afternoon. When it's at its hottest, we've got perfect shade for our grass. So our super climax grasses, our Panicum maximus we saw just now, the Witbiffel, that grass thrives under those conditions. So heat protection, definitely. Less evaporation, so we're getting more water into the ground. That tree is also a big nutrient pump. So it's pulling up nutrients from down deep in the soil with its deep root system. As leaves fall off, it's returning that back into the topsoil, bringing nutrients up. We produce sweeter, more nutritious grass. And also we get frost protection. It's like a greenhouse because we get sunlight coming in the daytime. But also when we get heavy frost, everything freezes off. Under the trees, we can have good grass still growing for much longer into the winter season. So what we can see there, cattle plus, it's actually around 20 game species if you add all of the mammals together, plus giraffe. Those are our tools that we use to try and restore this ecosystem. What we've sort of learned is that when we're talking about live mass, about weight, 80% cattle, 20% wildlife. Remember, the cattle are a lot heavier per individual, so you're not going to have as many cattle. You may have 200 cattle, and you may have up to 400 game animals, individuals. So you're still going to have a lot of game on your farm to show tourists, to hunt, to harvest as meat. But you're going to have less mass on the farm, which is grazing uncontrollably. The risk is the cattle come in, they open up everything beautifully for us, grow better grass, and then we run the risk that the wildlife comes and overgrazes the good work that we've done. That's what we want to prevent. So I wouldn't go out of this 80-20 ratio typically. Cattle take over the role of wild animals, big ruminants, buffalo, even elephant, wildebeest, big ruminants that go in the Serengeti savanna as a good example. They come in, they flatten everything, they graze away all that bulk roughage. That's the theory. I even want to take it a step further, and I think they must make sure that there's no bulk roughage. So because they consistently graze in a healthy ecosystem, all this bulk roughage down, we actually end up with better species grass and better quality grass. So it's not their job to eat the bad stuff. It's their job to make sure that we don't have any bad stuff. I think when you're going into this direction on any farm, especially on a degraded farm, it's important that you learn or do a lot of homework on grass succession. You get different kinds of grasses, different species. There's different conditions in which different grasses will flourish or not flourish. Maybe afterwards, if you have any questions, you can ask me on that, because if I start on that, we're going to be here until 6 o'clock. Undergrazing, I think, can be as bad as overgrazing, especially in terms of production. So if you look on the left-hand side, that's Hyperina, that's thatch grass, which hasn't been touched by cattle at least for about 40 years. So you can see in a veld which we rest too long, grass will grow. And remember, grass is not a tree which can shed its leaves. The grass just stays there. If we don't graze it, if we don't remove it, it has no reason to grow again, and it will not regenerate by itself. What's the positive news on the other side? You can see on the right-hand side there, we've come in, we've grazed and flattened. Obviously, that stuff on the left-hand side's got no nutritional value, but if you bunch your cattle together enough, you're going to trample it, you're going to flatten it and get it back to the soil where it's covering our soil, maximum soil cover, and also where it's in contact with the soil so that the microbes can break it down back into food for the plants. So on the right, we can see we already got some regrowth, and we get a lot of these kind of, we call in Afrikaans a pole, these patches of grass where you can see the entire middle has died out, and we've gotten this thing, which is, I don't know how many years old, producing again and back to life. Dung beetles, that's how active they can get. That was a big pat of manure, and you can see it's almost completely dug out. What do you think goes into the place where that soil came from? The manure. So we're getting guys who are doing this for us for free on the farm, and they're taking manure down into the soil. I think that's fantastic. If we destroy that, it's to our own detriment. That's just a bit of an idea of what it looks like. We want to try and never have grass on the farm that's older than 6 months. This is a difficult concept to get across, especially if you're very nervous about winters. But it should rain somewhere in 6 months. And depending on your rainfall, it could be a year, it could be 3 months. But essentially, the idea is there's no value, there's no use in resting dead grass. When it's grown out, it's done what it's got to do, and you've got to remove it so that it can start again. That's the important part I want to try and get across here. With non-selective grazing, electric fences, we can effectively harvest that grass and convert it back into manure, get all that biomass in manure back into the soil. So there's no reason, like I said, to rest a camp for 2 years and say, no, we just want to rest it. Graze it as hard as you can for as short a time as you can, and then give it adequate rest. At least 4 weeks, I think, is the bare minimum you want to try and give it in the growing season, but I'd stretch it maybe to 6 or 7 weeks. But you also don't really want to give it more than a year's rest. If you graze it hard, or if you graze it twice in one season, just rest it the next. You have to be flexible. You have to keep an eye out for how your grass is responding. You'll see a camp, maybe we graze it too hard, and you'll see it just doesn't come back. Then you readapt your camp size, you readapt your grazing time. But if you can, I think a good pointer, if you can graze that you move every single day and you rest at least up to maybe 6 months, there's very little you can do wrong. So yeah, what are we selling? We're obviously selling meat. So we started a small butchery as a side show to get into this way of getting our product out. What I've learned is, and there's one of the other farmers always says it, you don't cut out the middleman, you become the middleman. So beware of direct marketing, driving into town, delivering at home, because that's very difficult to scale. And then you also spend less time on the farm managing your chaotic natural environment. What we see there, though, I think a beautiful product, nice yellow colored fat, good marbling. This is off the felt. This is without eating any grain feeding. That's basically just on a maintenance lick. We also realize that if we want to try and produce beef from the felt throughout the year, it's a challenge if you do it when the climate does this. So what we said is, let's fence out 45 hectares, one corner of the farm, where we're going to keep away the game. It's only cattle. And there we're going to try and do ultra high density grazing. We're busy fencing it at the moment, but you can see over here, when the grass quality is good, utilization is good. So we grazing everything, we're putting back manure, we're trampling down a little bit of the unpalatable stuff, and we can do that 2 or 3 times in the growing season, and maybe even get a cut of hay off of it in winter. So there's an Afrikaans saying, your gras moet groei fiks wees. It's got to be grow fit. You don't get fit just from doing one session of exercise. It's continuous exercise. You get your soil healthy, you get your root systems bigger and resilient to grow. We wanted to do this with a minimum of actually 0 fertilizer. If we can get to it, 0 diesel, all perennial. That's the end goal. In the short term, we'll use a tractor and a ripper and a nice seeder. We'll get some biomass growing. But the end game is always to try and do this completely without inputs. Those are cover crops that we plant. That's a mix also of sorghums and millet, cowpeas in there. So a lot of these crops we saw this morning, highly adapted stuff for that climate, for those conditions. And when it rains nicely, you can see we just produce tons and tons of biomass. So that's a nice way to take old fields without fertilizer and expensive inputs. Treat your cover crop as a cash crop. In other words, do proper soil preparation, get stuff back to a good point where you get good germination. Don't try to go 0 till or no till from the start, and then systematically wean yourself off inputs. If you want, you can even put on some fertilizer so that it can grow and get some volume growing, and then you systematically switch over. It's very difficult to go over the top. You struggle sometimes to come back from it, and sometimes you can do more damage if you're not careful. But what's important there, you can see we're not cutting off and removing anything. Everything that you can see above the ground is going back to the ground through the animal. Yeah, we also saw that there's not a plant at that point on the market that could do what we wanted to do. I'm also an amateur tinkerer. I like playing around with things, so we just built ourselves a planter. So that's a planter that we built from 5 or 6 different brands, all secondhand, all spares. But what's important there, just out of interest, it's an electric drive. A lot of people are scared of electricity, or especially on farming equipment, but that's got an electric drive that meters out the seed and blows out the seed out the tubes for us. So there's no chains or no sprockets on there, only bearings, but no chains and no sprockets, which is a nice feature. Again, remember what I said, we started off making a complete seed bed, then systematically we just did a strip rip. So we use a ripper that goes in 30 centimeters. We work these roughly 30 centimeter broad strips, and then we plant into that. And once we got enough biomass eventually, we can then start to actually go completely no-till. So we've fitted one of those slicing discs in front, and we can actually now plant relatively well into no-till conditions. What we do see is where we do no-till, especially this season when the rain was really erratic, that's where the stuff just keeps growing when everything else stops. Just out of interest, to add to Adrian, what he said just now, we're at a point now with our disc planter, planting in no-till conditions where we're really struggling to get that soil firmed up and to get that seed soil contact to get good germination. So I think we'll have maybe a beer afterwards about how we can get that pressure up there. Good. So just my last point, how can we put a value to healthy felt or healthy ecosystem? We always know the cost of everything. How much does a bag of fertilizer cost? We don't always know the cost of what it does or the value of a healthy ecosystem. So see my scenario. If I wanted to double our business, if I say the 1,000 hectares, which it is too small for me to farm full time with the cattle we have. Let's say it's 1,000 hectares and we're carrying, it's 10 hectares per large livestock unit. If I want to do two scenarios next to each other, the one is I invest in another farm. We buy another farm through the bank. I buy the neighboring 1,000 hectares to try and get more animals to be profitable. Or I do a holistic investment where we do all the stuff we're talking about here today, really improving it over a 10-year period to try and grow my carrying capacity on the farm, to then try and hold more animals so I can actually sustain a living. So there's the two scenarios. We've got the 1,000 hectare farm. We've gone from 10 hectares that we need for one animal to 4 hectares that we need for one animal. So I can carry 250 producing cows. If I wean calves and sell calves from only 70% of those, which I think is realistic, I can, and we wean them, we take them away from the moms at 180 kilograms. I'm producing about 31 tons of marketable meat. That's meat over the scale that I can, and this is just weaner calves now. So we're not even selling them into the market. I'm selling them to the feedlot. All right. So that's the one model. I invest in, change my practices, and I increase my carrying capacity. The other side is we buy the farm. So now I've got 2,000 hectares. I'm on the same carrying capacity. So I've got 200 cattle that I can carry. Already you can see I'm at a loss. Because I'm a conventional farmer, those 140 calves that I'm going to wean that I can sell, we'll just pretend now that we're going to wean them at 200 kilograms. So we're going to wean them a bit heavier. Because a lot of people say, yeah, non-selective grazing means you wean lighter calves. So we just built that in. What we mustn't forget, on the right-hand side, the financial investment, that farm is going to degenerate as well. We're going to get more bush encroachment. Most likely with time, I'm going to need 11 or 12 hectares per animal. If a drought comes, I'm buggered. Input costs you saw are just still going up. On the other hand, the holistic farm, I'm keeping more rands on the farm and I'm more ready for a drought or a high rainfall season. So let's go on with that example just a little bit further. So on the financial investment, I've only got a turnover per year if I wean once a year, and that's all I do on the farm, 980,000 rands. The holistic investment, 1.1 million, right? If I were to finance this farm, and you'll have to look very far to find a farm that sells for 10,000 rands a hectare. But if we buy 1,000 hectares at 10,000 rands a hectare, that's 10 million rand. We're financing it through the bank, through Standard Bank or FNB, whoever you like, at 12%. I basically need to pay back 150,000 rands per month. How am I going to do that if my weaner calves are only giving me about 80,000 turnover per month? So essentially, a young guy like me trying to start off, it's not an option. So the point I'm trying to make here is for young guys, especially young farmers, there's huge opportunity in. There are people who are owning farms who are not farming them. There are crop farmers who've got felt that they are not using. There's so many opportunities out there. There's mining companies who have to buy the entire farm of 2,000 hectares to farm on 50 hectares. You know, there's so many opportunities there. So don't just look at land. Look at what you can do on that land. Look at what value you can add to it. Maybe you lease land from a farmer for a good fee and you say, give me a discount because I'm going to do X, Y, and Z to your land. And if that agreement doesn't work out, well, if you're stuck with 200 cattle, you're a lucky person. You can sell them and go and do something else. So you really, it opens up so many opportunities. also on the holistic investment, we mustn't forget that my running cost is a lot less. Yes, I am going to invest in water infrastructure to get those pipes in place, but to put up 1 meter of 5-strand barbed wire is a lot more expensive than having just 1 meter of polywire, which I'm moving around. So the one question people always ask, but Christian, why doesn't everyone do this in any case? Why is it only a few people that actually do it? I think we mustn't forget that change is scary. We as humans, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're scared of that chaos. But if you embrace that chaos of nature, and if you humble yourself and say, well, nature's in charge, someone else is in charge, I just got to adapt to it, I think that opens up a lot of doors. I think inputs are still too affordable for more people to do it. The distance between what we get and what we have to buy in is still big enough, but eventually that will catch up. And I think one important thing is if we could get for a grass-fed animal per kilogram, which will typically slaughter out as a C grade, we're getting less money per kilogram for that animal. If we can get A grade prices, we can compete with the feedlot. And if we can just change the grading system, if we can get a fair price for our grass-fed animals in South Africa, I think that's the only thing we need to do, and farmers will switch over by the thousands. Well, thank you, everybody. That's basically my story.